Welcome back to Garden Talk, brought to you by the Penn State Erie County Extension Master Gardeners. I'm your co-host for today, Mike Bailey, along with Ellen DePlacido. Good morning, Ellen.
Good morning, Mike.
Hey, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to continue talking a little bit about pollination, particularly wind pollination.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground on pollination so far, haven't we?
We have,
Yes.
yes,
So,
yes.
so today is going to be the wind, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And what subset of plants does this cover, okay, as far as wind pollination?
Mm-hmm. Particularly the grains, and we're going to talk about more about corn itself. Okay, we've been talking about vegetable garden plants and those that don't need pollination, and then we talked about some that do and how that pollination is accomplished. Some are self-pollinated, and some others require some sort of vector for pollination. So today we're going to talk about another subset of plants that accomplish pollination through another approach, wind pollination. And this is very interesting, especially to me, if not to anybody else. But this subset is primarily the grains where pollen is actually dislodged from the male part of the plant and then it drifts down to the female component. And like we said before, the most common plant in this category that you would find, particularly in a vegetable garden, would be corn.
Okay, fine. Let's kind of take a look at that then, okay?
Okay.
Everybody
Mm-hmm.
knows what a corn stalk looks like, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And when it's at its point of maturity, where it's got the tassels up above, that is where the pollen, okay, for the corn comes from, out of these tassels that are on top of that stalk. And the ovules, okay, the female component of this plant is within the cob, okay? And what
Mm-hmm.
the process is, the pollen has to access that ovule via the corn silk. That annoying corn silk that you have on those cobs does actually serve a purpose. That is the
Mm-hmm.
pathway, by which the pollen gets down to the ovule, fertilizes the ovule, and a kernel of corn develops. So, one grain of corn, one grain of pollen will
Mm-hmm.
pollinate a single kernel of corn. So, what happens is that pollen has to land on that silk, and the pollen grain itself consists of two cells. The first cell develops a tube all the way down through that corn silk, down to the ovule, and the other cell of that pollen grain actually follows down that tube and fertilizes that ovule, and that's where the kernel then develops.
Mm-hmm.
So, you got to think about it, okay? Think about how many kernels of corn are on a cob. In fact, I Googled that this morning.
Oh, did you? Nothing
how,
better to
how,
do,
what, no,
right?
wait, how many kernels does anybody think that they're on a corn cob? Take a guess, Ellen.
Oh, oh my gosh. I would say I'm just going to guess 1,000.
Well, it's 500 to 1,200. On average, and
Yeah.
they say on average
Hmm.
it's about 800 kernels of corn on each and every cob. So a
Right. And I mean,
little,
that would depend on the size of the cob, right?
yeah, a little bit of trivia. Next time you're munching on,
Yeah.
on corn on the
Yeah.
cob, you can mention that to the rest of the family,
How many
okay?
grains of
And
corn?
and they'll look at you like you're kind of crazy, okay? But
Yeah.
yeah, you can tell them where you got the information, okay?
Yeah.
But if you start to then connect those kind of dots, some other things come to mind. First of all, we need a lot. Need a lot of pollen, okay, to pollinate
Hmm.
an ear of corn. Okay, if a grain of pollen needs to land on each and every strand of corn, and if the strands are not pollinated, the ovule at the end of that strand is not going to be fertilized, and the kernel will not develop. Therefore, spotty pollination like that results in spotty kernel formation on the ear. We've all seen that.
Right.
You've all,
Right.
shucked an ear of corn, and you go, this is corn here,
It's
there,
not
and
very
everywhere.
good.
Yeah, you know, and we've all seen those ears. Okay, um, and maybe that particular plant was at the edge of the corn patch. Okay, and maybe didn't get as much pollen as the other ones towards the center, which leads us to the idea that, okay, you know, what are some of the things that you can do to ensure good pollination? And the most important thing is that you plant corn in blocks. You know, and every once in a while you see a garden where with a single long narrow row of corn. Well, what's going to happen there? You're probably not going to get very good pollination because depending upon how the wind drifts, okay, it might drift from side to side, and and you might not get a lot of good pollination. Okay, rather than plant that in a solitary row or two rows of corn, put that corn into some kind of a block. Okay, a 10 by 10 section or something like that, so that there is a lot of pollen that's going to fall on the individual ears.
Okay.
And I guess the other thing is that corn is a grain, and we're eating the seed. The taste of the seed can be altered by pollination from a different kind of corn.
Right.
So,
Right.
if you have different varieties of corn growing near each other, and they tassel out at the same time, okay, there's the potential for the pollen of one variety to pollinate the other variety of corn, and that results in a different genetic makeup, okay, of the kernel, and that alters the flavor of the kernel.
Okay.
So yes, the flavor of corn can be altered, by different kinds of corn planted nearby. And they say, the literature talks about within 400 feet. Now, so this is different than some of the other things that we talked about in the garden, that subset of that cucurbits, where, people worried about cross-pollination between their cucumbers and their squash, etc. And that, again, results in a genetic alteration of the seed. But it does not affect the fruit of the current year. The fruit of the following year will be affected because you changed the genetic makeup of the seed. So keep in mind, corn is different because we're eating the seed, not the fruit of the plant. So, Ellen, we've used up our time for today, and I hope that helps with the overall pollination principles, etc., and stuff like that. And I hope that you found that valuable. So thank you for listening, and we hope you're here next time. Thank you now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.